A buyer asked me the other day how quick we can expect to hear back from the seller after we make our offer. I told them the fastest I've ever had a response is about 5 minutes. The longest, well, that's a different story. Stay tuned and I'll tell you more on Taylor's Tuesday Tip and Tour. Hi, I'm David Taylor. Welcome to Taylor's Tuesday Tip and Tour. Today we're going to talk about negotiations in a real estate transaction. And there are several different types of negotiations. So we're going to cover pretty much all of them, or at least all the ones that I have been a party to. I'm sure there's some that I haven't so far, but give me time. I'm not ready to retire yet. So when you put together an offer as a buyer, there are some basic terms and conditions that are the most negotiated upon. So that includes purchase price, which is usually but not always the most important thing. The next is any seller credits that the buyer is asking, whether that's a contribution towards closing costs or for repairs or any number of things. The third is going to be the closing date. And then there's a couple of other things that go in there, such as earnest money, whether or not there's a home warranty that's being asked for, tax prorations. Those are really kind of the big things. Occasionally there's a contingency that gets negotiated also, but those are really the kind of like the big 3, 4, 5 things. And earnest money is probably the least negotiated on all of those. So the most negotiated is the purchase price. So we fill it out, and I like to use the hypothetical $500,000 purchase price. So the home's listed for $500,000. Depending upon what's going on in the market, the buyer may offer $500,000, $450,000, $550,000, or somewhere in between those numbers. Let's just say though that in this case, the $500,000 list price, they offer $475,000. They are also asking for a $7,500 credit that's going to go towards replacing the kitchen appliances, which are extremely old and dated. So, and then we want to close on June 30th. So those are kind of the main things. We're going to prorate taxes. We say at 110% of the previous year's tax bill. Depending upon where we are in the city of Chicago or the suburbs, that might be accurate. It might be 105%, any number of things. So we fill out the contract. If I'm representing the buyer, fill out the contract, and the buyer signs it, usually not by hand, but they sign it electronically using DocuSign. And then we email it over to the listing agent. Listing agent gets it and they look at it, and they typically prepare a summary for their seller. They then call the seller, which is what I do, pick up the phone, call, hey, we got an offer. We go over the terms, and then they say, that's great, we're gonna sign it. That's the one that takes 5 minutes. Click, 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 boom, they get it back over to us. Typically not in 5 minutes, but it happens fairly quickly. The second option that can also happen fairly quickly is absolutely not. We are not accepting that offer, rejected, boom. They send that back either verbally or an email saying, yeah, we're not accepting that offer. Most likely is that we get a counter offer. And in Chicago, this is all done verbally. So typically we back it up with either text messages or emails, just so that there is some form of a paper trail. But the initial offer is made in writing, where it's electronically signed. Everything else after that, until we have a accepted agreement, is basically done verbally. So we say, hey, we're offering $475, the purchase price, I know that you want us $500. The listing agent comes back and says, hey, we'll take $495. Buyer's agent goes back to their buyers, says, okay, let's do this. They come back at $485. Seller says, $485 is not enough. Give me $487, $500. Buyer agrees, boom, everything's great. Now in the meantime, there might be a couple of other things that people are negotiating on. So closing date of June 30th, nope, that isn't gonna work. Can we close on June 27th? For whatever reason, that's a better date for the seller. Buyer's like, yeah, it doesn't bother me, no problem. They agree to that. Tax prorations are like, hey, 110%, that seems a little excessive. Let's do 105%. we're talking a couple $100 difference to the buyer or the seller for that matter. So, that's something they can negotiate on. The seller credit, all those things are negotiated on. But that's basically how it works. Buyer makes the offer, seller makes a counter offer. Buyer then comes back with a counter offer number 2. Seller either accepts or rejects, or counter offer number 3 goes back to the buyer, accepts, rejects. Counter offer number 4, eventually we have what is known as an accepted contract. Typically, we then clean up the contract with all the current terms, so the $487,500 purchase price, the June 27th closing date, 105% tax prorations. It's all clean, send it over for new signatures, seller signs it, boom, we have an accepted contract. That then goes out to the buyers and sellers attorneys, goes to the lender, goes to our offices, because they like to keep track of all those things. And then we enter the attorney inspection review period, which is a totally separate video. We're not done with negotiating yet though, because there's still some things that can come up and that get negotiated on. So the first one of those is that attorney review period. The attorney prepares the buyer's attorney, the seller's too, but the buyer's attorney typically prepares a attorney letter, and they're like, hey, we want to clarify the language in the contract because some of it at this point is a little bit dated. We want to say this, and this, and there's 3 points or 10 points. There's also been an inspection done during that period, and during the inspection we did a sewer scope to see what the condition of the sewer is, and oh no, we found out that it's cracked. That's going to cost some money, so now we've got to ask for a credit repair, or repair credit. So, okay, we'd like you to contribute $2,500 or $5,000 towards that. So we put together that request, and it goes from the buyer's attorney to the seller's attorney, and guess what? We negotiate on that. So typically, again, but not always, I like to pick up the phone and call the seller's attorney. I'm sorry, not the seller's attorney. I never talk to the seller's attorney. I call the selling agent, the listing agent. Thank you. And say, hey, and I just did this today. John, it's David Taylor calling. Hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up. This is what's going to come over in the attorney letter. The sewer scope, as you know, there was a crack in the clay pipe. We need to get that fixed. So I just want to give you a heads up. We're going to ask for $2,500 for that. Typically, they appreciate that. They then go back to their seller. The seller's like, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. We're not happy, but we'll do that. We negotiate on it. Sometimes they're like, yeah, we're not doing that. So that's part of the negotiations. Again, they can accept what we've proposed, they can reject what we've proposed, or we can meet somewhere in the middle. So that's the second set of negotiations that go on. Typically, but not always, we are done at that point. Everything's great, no more negotiating. Sometimes there is though. Sometimes we have an appraisal issue. So the appraisal comes back and the appraisal is low. And we guess what? Yeah, we get to negotiate. So, and again, there's 3 options. The first is, okay, so we had a $487,500 purchase price. Unfortunately, the appraisal came in at $475,000 or $450,000. It doesn't really matter what that number is. Would if we're negotiating, but it comes in below the agreed upon sales price, and we get to negotiate. Does the seller want to accept that lower purchase price? So all of a sudden we've gone from $487,500 down to $475,000. Is that okay? If so, we're done negotiating. They can also say, heck no, we're not reducing it any more than we already have. Mr. Buyer or Mrs. Buyer, you can come up with the difference and pay that out of your own pocket. So that's option number 2, which is basically they're rejecting our request. And then what happens, like almost everything with negotiations, we oftentimes meet in the middle. So at this point, they've already said we're going to contribute, what did I say, $7,500 towards appliance credit. They may say, yeah, okay, we'll reduce the price, another $12,500, but we are not doing that credit anymore, or we're not going to give you a credit for repairs. So we can negotiate on that, and depending upon what's going on with the seller, what's going on with the buyer, we oftentimes meet in the middle. Although a lot of times the seller does agree to come down, to whatever the appraised value is, because they know that they're going to have the same issue with another buyer in all likelihood. So those are really the three different ways that we have negotiations. There's other little negotiations that we have sometimes about, timing of people moving in, moving out. But those are really it. So the initial negotiations with going back and forth on purchase price, closing date, closing credit, tax prorations, things like that. We then have negotiations over the attorney and inspection during that first AI period. And then finally, hopefully, I think you probably heard me knock on wood, we don't have any issues with the appraisal because that's not fun for anybody. Okay, so short, quick, and dirty video on what happens with negotiations. Again, it is almost all done verbally. Me talking, them talking, emails back and forth. So once we have an agreement, then we put it in writing, the attorneys put it in writing, we do addendums, we sign off on everything, so it isn't just verbal. There is no such thing in Illinois, and actually no such thing anywhere in the United States, as a verbal real estate contract. Everything has to be in writing in order to be a valid and legal contract. So we do make sure that we get there. All right, if you have any questions, leave them down below. Don't forget to hit subscribe. We'll be back every Tuesday with Taylor's Tuesday Tip and Tour. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a great day.